Before I start my presentation, I would like to ask you all a question. Can you imagine living in a world devoid of humanity and independent thinking? I suppose all of you would dismiss as frightening thoughts in a heartbeat. However, this is not the case for the protagonist in the novel I'm going to share today. The book is 1984, which was written by George Orwell in 1948, and I would like to divide my presentation into three parts: the plot, the pros and cons, and its inspiration for me. Starting with the plot, it is set in 1984 in a totalitarian state called Oceania, in which the government controls the thought of the population and brings them into unthinking obedience to its leader, the Big Brother. However, the main protagonist, Winston, has an intense longing for truth and independence, and as a result, he resents the government's oppressive control, and ultimately rebels against it. Unfortunately, his little rebellion does not last long, and he is eventually arrested for re-education, which serves to root out his virtues. Now familiarized with the plot, let's delve into the good points and bad points of it. For example, the first good point is that Winston's heroic acts are magnified by the dire consequences the book depicts. 1984 has put a huge emphasis on the effort Winston has taken to prevent his rebellious acts from being discovered, as he knows it will only lead to a painful death. To me, I believe this adds suspense and weight to all his actions as they are done under high stakes. And moreover, it is awe-inspiring for me to know that even though Winston has already weighed his pursuit of preserving virtues against preserving his own life, he still chooses the riskier option of pursuing these virtues for mankind initially. And the second good point is that 1984 is not cliché-ridden in terms of plot. Ends with the evil holding triumph over good. In the end, Winston's attempt to preserve his humanity is brutal, as during his re-education, he willingly betrays his love to Julia in hope of ending his suffering. For example, he shouted, "Do it to Julia, I don't care about her," when facing torture. To me, the concept of Winston's will for self-preservation overcoming his virtues, though not expected, is not entirely inconceivable. And to my dismay, this demonstrates that our virtues are not invincible, and I will elaborate further in the message part later. Every rose has its thorns, and 1984 is no exception, and I believe the ending can be misinterpreted in a pessimistic way which discourages action. George Orwell wrote 1984 was a world warning people about the dire consequences if totalitarianism is left unchallenged. And to achieve this, people have to be motivated to take action. Unfortunately, the dystopian way the book depicts the situation makes me believe that Winston, who still carries humanity and independence in himself, is the last flicker of hope left in his world, and it will be gone forever after his death. However, his future attempt to preserve his virtues simply gives me the wrong feeling that nothing, a totalitarian government, is unshakable and nothing can make a difference. Therefore, instead of prompting action that tries to salvage humanity in such a situation, isn't it giving us the wrong message that we should give up, as all our efforts will end in vain eventually? Now, moving on to the plot message, you may ask, in absence of a totalitarian government, how does 1984 relate to us? Personally, I believe our society resembles a totalitarian government, as both of them seeks to bend individuals according to the universal beliefs endorsed by it. And to define this brings us to the third theme, which is how we should respond when our humanity is challenged by prevailing norms in society. And to define humanity, I believe it comprises of our love, aspirations, and individuality. And let's dive right in. First, our aspirations should not be impeded by universal norms. In real life, many universal beliefs are perceived as unwritten rules in society, and society expects young people to follow suit. For example, when it comes to career planning, a survey conducted by the University of Hong Kong has found that a large proportion of parents, around 68% of them, judge their children for not prioritizing their salary over interest. And this is where the problem begins. In 1984, despite Winston knowing his aspiration of preserving humanity is the morally right thing to do, he still chooses to renounce it eventually to end his suffering. And similarly, for young people, despite knowing what they aspire for is conducive to their development, many of them still resort to conforming to these norms in hope of ending their suffering too. And this demonstrates that blindly enforcing these universal beliefs will have a distorting effect on individuals. And this gets me thinking. Living under a totalitarian government, perhaps there's no other option for Winston but to submit. But we have no obligation to make our society a totalitarian one, and therefore, why can't we be more open-minded to our aspirations by dropping our deep-seated beliefs? And if we do not do so, the consequences will be dire. In terms of individuals, on surface, both Winston and young people appear to simply renounce something that is precious to them, but on a deeper level, this implies that they are willing to give up everything, including their aspirations, morals, values, when confronting greater adversity. And this demonstrates what about our aspirations concern our morality, like aspirations for building a better world, aspirations for promoting equality and sustainability. These aspirations, like others, do lead to a bumpy road filled with challenges and obstacles posed by universal norms. However, should we fail to uphold these aspirations, progress in these areas will be stunted, and our world will face stagnation like Winston's. And in terms of society, many aspirations come into existence to address the issues associated with society. For example, in 1984, Winston's aspiration of restoring humanity tries to address the problem of a lack of human warmth in his world. And similarly, for young people, their aspiration of working as a freelancer tries to address the issue of a lack of fulfillment from the workplace itself. Therefore, if these aspirations are barred from execution simply because they violate some antiquated norms, then society as a whole will bear the loss of these improvements that it desperately needs. And therefore, it does not take much to see that we cannot afford to conform to these beliefs at the expense of our own aspirations. An equally important aspect is our individuality. Only through appreciating the differences and uniqueness of individuals can we build an inclusive society However, the totalitarian government in 1984 goes in the opposite direction by standardizing many aspects of the party members. For example, they are forced to wear the same uniform, they are forced to have the same schedule, and they are forced to take up the same ideologies. And as a result, they are being made virtually indistinguishable, and thus uprooting their individuality. And to my horror, I have realized that our younger generation is also moving in this direction, and the aftermath can be just as catastrophic. In Hong Kong, under the influence of celebrities and advertisements, many teens perceive the qualities possessed by their idols as standards that define perfection in one area. For example, having the appearance of a Korean pop star defines beauty, and unfortunately, this craze has slowly evolved in an obsession with making peers also conform to these standards. And facing peer pressure, I was also once tempted to shape myself according to these standards to gain recognition. However, 1984 warns us that the consequences of losing our individuality is dire. And for example, as in Winston's world, As no citizen is allowed to be special, ultimately they feel insignificant and doubt the purpose in existence. And similarly for teens, being as only a handful can be judged and considered as successful by these standards, for the most in terms of individuals, being excluded and judged inferior by these standards takes a toll on their self-esteem. And seeking to redeem themselves, many teens become eager to sacrifice their individuality and to morph themselves according to these standards. For example, undertaking plastic surgery to make over their appearance. And doesn't this goes against our human nature of pursuing independence and developing and building our identity and individuality? And in terms of society, so our society will become increasingly homogeneous as it disallows any deviations from the standards it endorsed. And in the long run, the once vibrant society, which is built on the foundation of our individuality, will be gone forever. And therefore, it is unwise to sacrifice our individuality to conform to these meaningless standards. But, if we think deeper, why do we all conform to these meaningless standards in the first place? I believe the reason, the root of this problem lies in the lack of critical thinking in daily life. We simply follow what we perceive without thinking, and this brings us to the second theme, which is the importance of critical thinking. And to begin with, critical thinking is crucial in safeguarding our interests, as taking in information passively represents an opportunity for others to manipulate our interpretation by controlling what facts are being presented to us. And the government in 1984 takes this to extreme. Every time when it fails to deliver its promise, the government destroys all evidence of its empty promises, and as a result, only receiving positive information regarding the government, the population is being misled into believing the government is capable. And this demonstrates that how easy our interpretation can be misleaded. And similarly, perhaps you may question the necessity of spending the extra effort and validating the information we receive. 1984 tells us that it's worthwhile to do so, as the development in Winston's world grinds to a halt as the government is no longer obliged to fulfill any promises. And ultimately, it's the citizens' interest that is being sacrificed. And this gets me thinking. Simply believing whatever other tells us equals to putting our own interests at others' disposal. And we cannot take it for granted that all the news we receive is unbiased and hope that everything will work out fine for us. Take the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war as an example. All news reports on the casualty and the morality of this war is being censored on the Russian state media, while only broadcasting victories after victories. And as a result, the poor Russians are being misled into believing they should continue to support this invasion. And therefore, this highlights with critical thinking, we'll be in a better position to sniff out the lies and be less susceptible to the deceivers. And therefore, for example, we can ask ourselves, is this too good to be true? And therefore, it is imperative for us to stay critical of all the information we receive, as in the long run, it will be us who suffer if we all get manipulated for others' gains. And to summarize, I believe our critical thinking safeguards our humanity, while our humanity drives our desire to protect our interests through critical thinking, and therefore they mutually complement each other. And to conclude, I would like to ask you all to recall the question I asked at the start. The reality is that if we don't do anything, this unsettling imagination will become a harsh reality. And to me, I highly recommend reading 1984 as it serves as a much needed wake-up call for us. Personally, I believe It is obvious to us when we are forced to renounce our human virtues under bodily torture. But many of us are indifferent and ignorant to the daily choices that will ultimately cost ourselves our humanity. Perhaps you may think that we can afford to lose bits and pieces for our temporary pleasure and convenience, but one day this irreversible loss will get out of control, and it will no longer be our choice to choose to lose it or not, but we will pay the price wisdom paid to preserve the last bit of it. And therefore, our future hinges on actions we take today. So let's stay vigilant and protect this precious thing our protagonist Winston was unable to behold before it's too late. Thank you, and before I end my presentation, I would like to ask you all, the audience, for questions. Oh my god， 好唔通順。Oh my god， 你應該幾多呢？ Oh my god， 唔敢直筆。